Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you, members who are supporting me during this mayoral year. It's getting fairly close to the end of the mayoral year, and we're going to be going out with a bit of a bang. We are. Don't forget the mayor's quiz night and also the mayor's coffee morning. Also, it's in its early stages of planning, but Councillor Swinburne will be pleased to hear this. On the 1st of April, I'm planning a 24-hour litter pick around the borough. I'm hoping as many members join me as possible. I've already had Dave, who said he's going to be joining me, and Father Andrew. We might even get the chief exec. We might do. So let's make a huge difference as we move ahead tonight. But thank you very much for that, members. I'd like to welcome you all to this very important meeting in the council's year, where we'll set as a council balanced budget and set the council tax for the coming year. Let's have a relevant and useful debate at all times, conducting that debate with dignity and respect. A reminder to please switch on your microphone, and I must remember to do that, before speaking and voting so that people viewing the meeting can hear you. I now move to item 2 on the agenda. Apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence for this meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apologies received from councillors Haggis, Downs, Goodwin and Jervis.
Thank you, Chief Exec. Item 3, declarations of interest. I will ask the monitoring officer to provide general advice to members on declaring interest with regard to the budget and setting of the council tax. Are there any declarations of interest from members in any item on this agenda of this meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, members. Just to advise and assure that council tax falls within the exempt categories detailed in the Members' Code of Conduct. And although it's accepted that as payers of council tax you may have an interest, there's no need to declare anything this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer. Item 4, Budget and Medium-Term Financial Plan, 2025-2026 to 2027-28. A report outlining how the council plans to deliver its agreed financial strategy over the coming 3-year period. This report was considered by Cabinet on the 12th of February 2024. The decision notice of that meeting has been tabled this evening. May I remind members that the Leader of the Council has up to 20 minutes to present his budget speech. Councillor Jackson, would you now present your budget speech?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to move the 2025-2026 budget and summary 2025-2026 to 2027-2028 medium-term financial plan as set out in the agenda papers. As has already been mentioned, the recommendations are actually set out in the Cabinet decision notice on page 2 of that, which has been circulated to members. The reason that's been circulated, Mr. Mayor, is because there's an additional recommendation, the final one that came from last week's Cabinet meeting. I will just read that out for the benefit of members. That's the recommendation from formal budget scrutiny. A budget of 150,000 be apportioned for the next 2 years from the planned use of flexible capital receipts, the public health budget to support transformational projects, subject to the realisation of appropriate capital receipts and appropriate projects being accompanied by suitable business cases, and that the Section 151 officer be authorised to make appropriate adjustments to the budget and medium-term financial plan. So, as it says there, Mr. Mayor, that was a recommendation from scrutiny. This administration does value the role of scrutiny. and we were pleased to receive that recommendation from scrutiny. We believe it will help to focus on addressing health inequalities in the borough. Therefore, we were pleased to accept it and recommend it on to council. Mr. Mayor, this budget, finance and business plan outlines how the council will support the strategic outcomes and priorities in the council plan approved at the December full council meeting. As members will know, we have two strategic priorities: stronger economy and stronger communities. To progress these, we are proposing a clear and robust finance and business plan delivering long-term financial sustainability. Mr. Mayor, as in previous years, the focus is on making North East Lincolnshire a better place for our children and young people, delivering the infrastructure, facilities, environment and services they need, and which will attract and retain new investment, jobs and wealth to the area. This also makes North East Lincolnshire more attractive to those looking to move here from other parts of the country. Mr. Mayor, this strategy is clearly working. Recent figures show that North East Lincolnshire now has the highest median earnings of any local authority across Greater Lincolnshire, £34,614 per annum, which is only £500 per annum behind the England average of £35,100. The days of North East Lincolnshire having a low wage economy are at last starting to come to an end as new investment, new jobs and new industries move into the area. Mr. Mayor, this administration is delivering a massive regeneration programme across Grimsby and Cleethorpes based on the two towns' master plans. The capital programme in the papers in front of you tonight reflects this regeneration investment. In Grimsby, the focus is on the reimagining and diversification of the town centre. We've got the Freshney Place leisure scheme incorporating the new cinema, market hall and other leisure outlets, which was approved at the December full council meeting, and that's backed up by a robust Freshney Place business plan, which is seeing the shopping centre thriving. And that, of course, includes the new community diagnostic centre within Freshney Place, which the NHS will be opening within the next few weeks. We've also got the on-site youth zone opening later this year in the old West Havens Maltings in the town centre. Progress with the reimagining of St James House is progressing well. That will be a new business centre and will attract new footfall into that part of the town centre. We've also got the planning application now submitted for 123 homes on the Alexandra Dock, which will at last start making use of our waterfront, something we have sadly failed to do for a long time in the centre of Grimsby. And the planning application has now been submitted to start work on the transport hub between Osborne Street and Garden Street, which will, once in operation, will allow us to bring back together all the buses in the town centre rather than having the bus stops distributed around the streets, which has not worked particularly well. We've also got the modernisation and reconstruction of the Doughty Road depot, which will bring much of the frontline service delivery into Grimsby town centre. And finally, in Grimsby, we've got a series of public realm works and improvements, which most of which are now delivered, but further ones are planned. In Cleethorpes, Mr. Mayor, as set out in the capital programme, we've got extensive regeneration works backed up by Levelling Up funding. As we all know, Cleethorpes is the East Coast's leading resort, and the works that we are planning will help to attract more visitors to the resort and help to make it an all year round resort. So in Sea Road, we've got the new iconic building, which members will have seen in the planning application. Work has now started on that side. We are reinventing the Victorian Pier Gardens, and again, members will be aware of the plans for that. And again, Cleethorpes Marketplace plans are progressing for the delivery of improvements there as well. So an exciting time for Cleethorpes. You'll also see in the capital programme that we will be completing in the next financial year the important repairs to the A180 bridges. The A180 is vital for connectivity to the resort and the Port of Grimsby, and this will ensure that that very important road is suitable for its role for many years to come. Mr. Mayor, we're continuing major investments within children's services. We know there's still a long way to go with those, but progress is now very rapid, and that's been backed up by the recent monitoring visits that we've had. But as I say, there's still much to do there. We're also building 2 new schools within North East Lincolnshire, one in Waltham, one in Scartho. Again, a reference to those in the capital programme. And we've also got a number of extensions and improvements to existing schools across the borough. All these capital projects, Mr. Mayor, are backed by robust business cases and strong governance. We are delivering all this investment whilst maintaining prudent and relatively low levels of borrowing compared to most other authorities up and down the country. And, you know, when you look at the scale of regeneration, redevelopment in the town, I think that borrowing is justified. We are already benefiting, Mr. Mayor, from devolution investment too, making use of brownfield grant fund monies to help to progress the Freshley Place redevelopment and the transport hub. Mr. Mayor, we continue with our ambitious asset rationalisation programme, ensuring that the council operates more efficiently, that we reduce our carbon footprint and ensure that unused buildings can be brought back into use by the private or voluntary sector. We're also very importantly maintaining investment in frontline services, street cleaning, grass cutting, parks and open spaces, refuse collection and recycling. I emphasise, Mr. Mayor, there are no cuts in any of these areas within tonight's budget, and that's a contrast to many other local authorities up and down the country. Mr. Mayor, we'll continue to take full advantage of the flexible use of capital receipts to transform and improve service delivery. We're also this year bolstering our reserves, recognising the challenging economic environment in which we operate as a local authority. I'm afraid this environment has not been helped by Labour's recent national budget, and in particular the increases in national insurance contributions. Despite the fact that we were promised we would be compensated for this increase, North East Lincolnshire Council has a £200,000 shortfall due to the increase in national insurance contributions as against the compensation that we receive for that. The national insurance contribution increases, coupled with the national minimum wage increases, will also have a major effect on our suppliers and contractors, especially within the adult social care space. This just adds further to the challenges that we face within adult social care. These are set out within the budget papers, and I'm sure that Councillor Shreve will mention those again in his speech. Mr. Mayor, despite all these challenges, we are still proposing a council tax and adult social care precept increase below the 5% threshold at 3.98%. We are one of the few local authorities up and down the country not levying the full 5% this year. We recognise the cost of living challenges for local residents, and this is our contribution to try to help that. If we look at particularly some of the Labour authorities up and down the country who've been given permission to exceed the 5% threshold, there are some eye-watering council tax increases in some other parts of the country. Thankfully, Mr. Mayor, not in North East Lincolnshire. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to thank the finance team for the work they've put into putting this budget together. So it was a very busy time of year sorting out the budget for a large local authority like North East Lincolnshire. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the staff for the work they put into delivering services across the council within the challenging environment that we operate. Finally, Mr. Mayor, I just want to say that this administration is delivering in spades a stronger economy and stronger communities and greater prosperity for North East Lincolnshire, whilst maintaining healthy and sustainable finances. And I commend this budget to the Chamber. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Harness, as portfolio holder for finance, resources and assets, would you like to address the council and second the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to second the motion as amended. The council has scrutinised the draft budget and the MTFP plan 2025-26, 26-27 at two formal budget scrutiny sessions. As we all know, the council must deliver a balanced budget for the year 24-25 and provide a realistic financial forecast for the MTFP period to comply with its legal obligations. The MTFP plan on page 10 of the report details that balanced position for 25-26 with a healthy £5.25 million contribution to earmarked reserves in year one, followed by contributions to earmarked reserves in years 2 and 3. Following receipt of the local government financial final settlement, there are only minor changes to report. NELC have not been fully compensated for the direct cost of the employer's national insurance increase imposed in the Chancellor's budget. There is a £0.2 million shortfall. Indirect costs have not been funded, as we know. The Children's Social Care Prevention Grant is £0.1 million higher. The business rates retention is updated following the submission of the NNDR1 return by 370,000 K in 25-26, and the following years have been updated accordingly. Funding gaps in years 2 and 3 of the MTFP are now slightly higher at £4.4 million and £6.4 million. These indicative shortfalls reinforce the difficulties a small unitary like ours has in fully funding the growth in demand for adult social care without the long-awaited central government solution and support. I will resist the temptation to mention local government reorganisation and the effect it may have on the funding model. This is a single-year settlement from central government, delivering a 6.8% national cash term increase. In December 2024, the government announced that from 26-27, it would introduce a new assessment of need and resources, building on the framework set out in the previous government's review of relative needs and resources, originally called the Fair Funding Review. We await the results of the 25-26 local government funding review that may be delivering multi-year settlements, fair funding, and a business rate reset. The Greater Lincolnshire Devolution approval allows local leaders to sustainable funding and greater freedom to take decisions on how to provide vital services in our community. At a time when local authorities are in serious financial trouble, we are able to recommend the approval of a less than inflation council tax rise of 1.98%, plus the adult social care precept, and deliver a balanced budget without any reduction in frontline services. The report does not underestimate the challenges of extra demand for our services. The report does not underestimate the challenge of delivering our exciting and transformative capital programme. The quarterly performance and finance reports demonstrate the progress that transformation is having on the council's finances, but the transformation journey is not over. The application of the use of £2 million of flexible capital for transformation purposes will continue over each of the next 2 financial years. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank the finance team. They worked incredibly hard, crunching the numbers either side of the festive season to produce this report. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry about that. Councillor Wheatley, as leader of the principal opposition group, would you like to address council?
I would, please, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Well, here we are again. What can I say about this budget, Mr. Mayor? I could have initially been minded to support it, mainly based upon the increased funding settlement that had been received from government, the most we've received in several years, to support innovation in service delivery, to support better services, to support services delivered in new and exciting ways for the benefit of our residents. The extra funding provided alongside the prudent management of finances by the officers have enabled this council to be in a better financial position than many others. But is this administration really trying to capitalise on this by giving the hard-working ratepayers of this borough the help they actually need? Not in my opinion. This budget is not addressing the needs of our most vulnerable residents. In fact, I doubt if they actually know who these people are. And in this budget, it is not addressing the areas or issues that need serious action. For example, taking young people out of poverty and into employment should be a focus to prevent the cycle of poverty, crime and deprivation that exists in parts of our borough. Budget report has offered some reassurances, specifically around the continued support for children's services, but has also highlighted deficiencies that must be addressed. For so long, we opposition members have not been privy to so many actions affecting our residents and boroughs, highlighted so starkly last night. And with a council of no overall control, this is even more important, especially when it comes to public money. People in this chamber will remember that I and my group opposed the council plan for being lacklustre and lacking in any fresh ideas. This budget is a similar vein, lacking in vision, lacking in potential, and to all intents and purposes, vanilla. The only time I want anything vanilla, Mr. Mayor, is when I'm eating ice cream on Cleethorpes seafront. Certainly not as a budget to allegedly push forward economic growth and prosperity for our area. This administration have been in place now for coming up 6 years. And during that time, they have become comfortable thinking that they know all of the answers and are doing things right. The administration, in my view, have become complacent, and the little they have done has not made any tangible difference, or more importantly, any major benefit to the residents of North East Lincolnshire. This narrow mindset has led to a singular lack of ambition in initiative and focus on what is really needed, and this budget reflects that sad state of affairs. Put it bluntly, Mr. Mayor, it is not a budget that meets my expectations for innovation. It is not a budget that meets the expectations of the residents of North East Lincolnshire. It is not a budget that takes full advantage of the better settlement. It is a bland, dull, uninspiring budget put forward by an administration that are out of touch, out of ideas and fast running out of time. No doubt we, as an opposition, will be criticised for not putting an alternative forward. I say, why should we do your job? It's your budget, you need to own it. You need to own the rampant borrowing on Freshney Place. You need to own the bottomless pit of spending on Corporation Bridge. And if you can't come up with any better ideas, then move aside for somebody who can.
Thank you, Councillor Wheatley. Before I invite other speakers, may I remind members that your speeches should be confined to the budget. I have Councillor Acethorpe next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to move a budget amendment as set out in the papers about to be distributed. Mr. Mayor, would you like me to pause briefly and continue once members have the papers in front of them?
We'll have a few minutes, members. Councillor Acethorpe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The amendment before us, Operation Clean and Green, is a forward-thinking plan to improve street cleaning, waste management and community engagement. Mr. Mayor, this amendment is not just about cleaning our streets. It is about enhancing the quality of life for our residents, restoring pride in our neighbourhoods and building a cleaner, greener future for all. Currently, Mr. Mayor, the council street cleaning service barely meet legal minimums, leaving many residential areas without the attentions they need and deserve. Only 2 operatives cover high footfall areas like Grimsby and Cleethorpes town centres, while far too many streets are left behind. We see the consequences every day. Litter piling up, attracting vermin. Roadside curbs clogged with dirt where street sweepers can't reach due to parked cars, and an increase in fly tipping and streets visibly deteriorating. We spend huge amounts cleaning up after fly tipping, but we haven't done enough to stop it at the source. In East Marsh alone, Mr. Mayor, my colleagues and I report over 1,000 cases last year, mostly consisting of fly tipping and litter. That's just one ward, and others are suffering just as much. Across the borough, residents are fed up, and rightly so. Our communities deserve better. The Liberal Democrat amendment before you proposes a £200,000 investment funded from the Transformation Fund for 1 year pilot, 1 year to pilot a targeted community-driven initiative that will, 1, increase workforce capacity, hiring 4 additional borough operatives, which will improve the frequency of street cleaning and reduce costly reactive interventions. 2, expand service coverage, focusing on 6 worst affected wards: East Marsh, West Marsh, Park, Headinge, South Ward and Sydney Sussex. 3, introduce targeted street cleaning, which includes community engagement and notifying residents in advance to temporarily remove vehicles, enabling thorough cleaning, pothole repairs and litter removal, etc., maximising the impact of existing resources. 4, boosting community engagement, establishing an urban litter ranger to promote civic pride and support schools, businesses, residents, volunteers on maintaining the local environment. And 5, enhance bulky waste collection, allowing neighbours to share the cost of bulky waste removal, making disposal more affordable and potentially reducing fly tipping. Mr. Mayor, this £200,000 proposal covers staff, equipment, operational costs. This is not just an expense, it is an investment in cleaner streets, healthier communities and a more attractive borough. This is a practical, cost-effective solution that has been reviewed in advance by the Street Cleaning Department, the Section 151 officer and the monitoring officer, all of whom agree that this proposal is valid. Crucially, Mr. Mayor, this initiative ensures accountability and value for money, with impact assessments reviewed by the Community Scrutiny Panel. If the pilot proves successful, Mr. Mayor, we can refine and expand the strategy by exploring further funding sources, delivering even greater benefits to the borough. Mr. Mayor, this amendment is not about party politics, it's about people. It is about delivering real, tangible improvements to the places we all live and work in. So we have 2 choices today, Mr. Mayor. We can continue with a reactive, ineffective system that struggles to keep up, or we can take bold action, invest in our communities and create a cleaner, healthier and more vibrant borough. Let us show our residents, Mr. Mayor, that we hear their concerns and that we are willing to act. I urge you all to support this amendment and help build a cleaner, greener future for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Acethorpe. Do I have a seconder?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to second this motion and reserve the right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Emerson.
Mr. Mayor, can I raise a point of order? And I ask this as a general query, and it is a genuine query. It's not any prejudice around the amendment, because we know footage from these meetings does sometimes end up online with slightly misleading narrative. But obviously, this amendment emphasises this money is to be taken for the transformational fund. But I'm not actually quite sure what the implications are or what specific project this money is being withdrew from to allow this actually to take place. And I'd like more information as to what are the implications around this £200,000 within the transformational budget to actually make a meaningful decision. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Patrick. I'm now going to refer to the 151 officer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Transformation Reserve is a pot of money that is set aside for various transformation projects throughout the year. So there aren't any specific projects that are allocated to that reserve at this point in time. So this project that is being proposed as an amendment is deemed valid in terms of the proposal, and it's a transformation project, so it's valid for funding from that reserve, in my opinion.
Point of order.
Thank you. Councillor Shutt.
I too think it's possibly a very good idea, but does Transformation Fund run out in 2030?
151 officer.
So, Councillor Shutt, the proposal is to fund from Transformation Reserve for 1 year to gather the data and evidence to determine whether or not the proposal is valid for introducing into normal service provision, in which case it would have to be funded from recurrent funding and not from reserves. So it's just a one-off for 1 year only funding allocation.
So we're employing 4 or 5 people for 1 year only. I just thought I'd clarify that.
Yeah.
That's very kind.
Thank you very much, sir. We're now speaking on the amendment. So members, please speak to the amendment. Thank you very much. Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, this does look like something we could support. Almost wish I'd thought of it myself. We've thank you to the Labour group for clarifying where the money is going to come from. It is for 1 year. It could make a huge difference. I particularly like the notification of the street cleaner, and I would like to see that across all wards, even in my wards. How often does the street cleaner come all the way out of Grimsby, probably 10 miles, to find cars parked in the road so those bits of road don't get swept? I think that is a brilliant initiative. We can get the roads swept properly with a little bit of notice. It's simple, isn't it? But it could really work. So I'm happy to support the amendment, Mr. Mayor, and I hope the rest of my group and the rest of the chamber will do also. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hudson. I've got Councillor Shreve next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to support the amendment for 2 specific reasons. The fact that it covers a wide range of the wards in our more deprived areas is really interesting to me. So it's not just something that's sitting in East Marsh, it's East Marsh, West Marsh, South and Sydney, Sussex, etc. And the second reason is, if you read it carefully, what it is also doing is encouraging personal responsibility. And it's only by encouraging and developing personal responsibility that we'll get a long-term solution to this. And I sincerely hope that the 1 year pilot is sufficiently successful for it to be incorporated into the planning process for future years. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Can I make apology to 2 members because we move straight on to amendment? Councillor Micklebrook, did you want to speak on the amendment?
No, I just wanted to speak on the motion, but I find it interesting that I learn about the amendment not for getting official papers, but by reading the Evening Telegraph this morning. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Anderson, did you want to speak on the amendment? Thank you very much. Move on to Clerk Lindley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Well, this is an absolute breath of fresh air. A positive amendment at a budget setting meeting. And it's great. It delivers for stronger communities, delivers for stronger community engagement. It improves efficiency, reduces maintenance backlogs, and it delivers across the borough, as Councillor Shreve said. But most importantly, it's affordable. And I think we demonstrates that if we can afford to do things, we'll do it. But, you know, it's a really positive. So well done to the Lib Dems for submitting this. And maybe the Labour group should take a leaf out of their book. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lindy. Councillor Stuart Swinburne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As already been highlighted, I think this is a wonderful amendment, actually. And if I look at some of the points in there that I'm quite pleased about, 2.3 that Councillor Ainsworth has pointed out about targeted street cleaning, it is something that we have done in the past, Mr. Mayor, when we've closed the street off, when we've highlighted a particular area that needs addressing. But this amendment, which I will be supporting, is for the operating of clean and green, and it's laying back the cleansing, waste management. But also in that 2.3, it does give highlight to highways as well. And I'm sure that highways will be prepared to work alongside this when it comes to the pothole repairs, the refreshed road markings and such like. So I think it's a great initiative that I'm sure that all departments within the council can work towards and make sure it's a better and greener place for the borough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Swinburne. Councillor Morland.
Heaven forbid I would stand up, Chair, and be, Mr. Mayor, and be cynical, but it strikes me that this amendment to the budget is welcomed by the lead administration. Quelle surprise. And it's pulled out tonight at the last minute, and we learn about it in the press. Why didn't we know about this before? However, I will say that the targeted street cleaning in 2.3 is a good idea, and I also think that 2.4 is a good idea. But what concerns me about this funding is that quite simply, we're talking about engaging the community. Well, I've got to be careful here because I do live in this borough, but it has to be said. It's like when people complain about parking outside schools. It's the parents who park outside the schools and then claim that the parking is the problem and that could hurt their little children. Now, for me, when it comes to this, who puts the rubbish in the alleyways? Members of the community. So what we're looking for, Mr. Mayor, is more funding to let people clear the alleyways, get the community involved.
Going to personal explanation, Mr. Mayor, it's not about alleyways, it's about our street scene. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Mayor, that includes alleyways, street scene. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was making a point. I find it extremely bad-mannered. Right, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
For clarity, the leader's indicated he only gets the right to reply at the end of the debate on the amendment. Just to be clear, you do get to speak, but at the end of the debate on the amendment.
The main amendment. Well, we're speaking on the amendment, aren't we?
Councillor Morland, just to be clear, the leader indicated he wanted to speak. I've just clarified with Mr. Mayor that he can only speak at the end of the debate on the amendment. You're free to keep going with the Mayor's permission.
Thank you very much. Right. So what concerns me is that we clear these alleyways and then what happens again? Because I don't know if anybody watched the news the other night. There is a lot of criminal activity where they go around dumping waste. They go around to people and say, we'll clear your house for you for £100. That £100 goes straight into the pockets of the person who has that truck. And what they do is they chuck it in any alleyway or any street scene they can. So what concerns me is, will we be encouraging more criminal activity of that nature? Now, I like the idea of the community having clean streets, alleyways, etc. However, the point is, why are we getting this rubbish dumped in the first place? Shouldn't we actually be looking at the big programme, the mega programme, which is not charging people for taking rubbish to the tip in the first place? That's one of the problems. We charge there. So this 200,000 that we're talking about, we could actually be saying to people, you can take your rubbish to the main tip and that will help you keep your alleyways clear. The other thing, of course, is we've got a lot of private landlords. And I hate to say this, they do not have any interest, because they don't live in the borough, they have little interest in the locale in which they have their houses. I'm sure some will come at me and say, you're talking rubbish, that may be so. But a lot of people have houses from various parts and they buy up in this borough because they've got cheap housing and they can sell. And it so happens to be in some of the boroughs where some people who are making this amendment would benefit from the street cleaning exercise. Again, let it not be for me to be cynical. However, I do like the idea of targeted street cleaning, etc. But we need to look at the source. Why are people dumping the rubbish in the first place? Why are people not Let me give you 2 examples, just where I am, at 5 Ways. 2 rubbish bins have been removed. That leaves 1 across the road near a bus stop. And so what I'm looking at is, why aren't we putting these facilities back on our streets instead of letting people drop them? We've got one thing I will say is, and again, the residents may attack me for this, but they are the cause of the rubbish on our streets. Residents and people who come out of shops just dump the rubbish. Why are we providing an extra service when we should have the bins in the streets in the first place? Now, I know we need to clean up the borough, etc., but we've got to look at cause and effect. If people drop the rubbish, why are we expected to put on extra facilities when it takes them, when they should be thinking, I shouldn't be dropping this in the first place?
1 minute, Councillor Morland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I won't even take that minute up. My point is that it's a good idea in essence, but will it lead to clearing up, etc., and then just adding to the problem further down the line, that more rubbish will be dropped and more alleyways will be filled, which then gets us back to a circular motion, and plus the fact that this has only just been dropped on us, and it's also got the support of the lead group, which begs the question of why it's taken so long to come out. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Morland. Councillor Holland.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I welcome this amendment. I think it's a good idea. But the thing that struck me when I read this is, to date, we've just had 2 borough operatives for the whole of this borough, and people have been complaining for years about the state of the streets, St James Square and so on. And then when you realise, actually, although we say that we maintain frontline services, there's only been two people out there with barrows on a daily basis. That explains why we've not been keeping on top of the rubbish. And I really welcome this amendment. I think it's a good idea as a pilot. But I think looking ahead after a year, we have to be looking at more permanent arrangements so that we have more people out on a daily basis, not as part of a pilot, but to make sure that the streets get cleaned on a daily basis.
Holland, Councillor Freeston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm actually delighted to stand up and support this amendment. I think that it's important that we take pride in the place that we live. And it's like the broken windows theory in New York. So if we start taking care of the little things in the area, people will grow up with more pride in their area and take care. And that will be something, an ethos that people are brought up with, which I think is sadly lacking. However, I will not be supporting the budget overall. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Freeston. Councillor Bright.
I'm also rising to support this motion, and just to pick up on a couple of Councillor Morland's points, we do have, or I hope we're going to have at some point in the near future, the Cabinet Working Group on street scene, so we could potentially address some of the concerns that Councillor Morland had when we convened that working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bright. Councillor Clough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a ward councillor in a ward where we do a lot of litter picking, the same as our Lib Dem colleagues as well, I do welcome this. I think it's well thought out. It would have been nice to have seen it a little bit more in advance, rather than just having to read through it quickly. So in principle, I do think it's a good idea, and I think community engagement around longer term, and the broken window effect is something we talk about a lot. Children walk past rubbish to go to school. I think having a team, a different way of challenging this can give people more pride in their communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clough. Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to support this amendment. And it's quite strange, really. I've been involved in enforcement of littering over the borough for about 4 years now, maybe 5. And I can assure the members in this chamber that if we gave free use of the tip, they would still dump their waste in the street. 2.4 of this amendment is especially important, the education side of this, educating people what they can and what they can't do with their waste. And what we've got to look at over that next year is to ensure that we get that message across, and we get it across in such a way, Mr. Mayor, that they are taking those points on board. I also think, Mr. Mayor, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to maybe just try something slightly different, and the amendment is slightly different. It is cost effective, without a doubt. It's achievable. It's not going to cause too much disturbance in other services. And it's something that, if it is successful, we can roll it out to other areas within the borough. There's fly tipping, Mr. Mayor, in the Wolds, in Waltham, in Humberston, in East Marsh, in West Marsh. It is a blight across this borough. And if we can do this, if we could do this small part, make this better and create less fly tipping, then it's got to be worth its weight in gold, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shepherd. Councillor Mickleborough.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. The reason why a lot of people don't take things to the tip is we haven't got a car or facility to anything to get to the tip for. And the charge that currently exists at a time when people are struggling, household bills are going up, inflation's up to 3%. This council tax is going to probably go up by 3.98%, which is more than inflation. So I think the suggestion made of group bookings and getting together, I think is a good idea. So I'd better like to point out the fact people haven't necessarily, without that, have got the facility to take things to the tip. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mickleborough. Councillor Wheatley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am minded to look favourably upon the amendment, because actually I think there are the bones of a good idea there, but I think it also needs quite a lot more work. I've been reading the paper, and it talks about 4 barrow operatives to work Monday to Friday. So does litter not accumulate on a weekend? Because I would argue that Friday night and Saturdays are more likely to have litter than Wednesday afternoons. I'm not quite sure whether it goes far enough, and I am still worried about the single year funding. I think that if we give with one hand and then take away with the other one, I think that we're setting ourselves up for a bit of a fall. I also believe let this to be looked at by scrutiny by all means, but I don't necessarily think that it just needs to go to the communities panel. It has been mentioned that it's going to impact on other areas such as transport, so I think that it needs to be more wide-reaching than just the communities panel. And just on a final note, that if there are 1,000 instances reported in one ward of litter, that I suggest that the strategy in that ward for the councillors need to be looked at rather than carrying on regardless. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wheatley. Councillor Shutt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Someone who spent many years in street cleansing, what's not to like? I've got to be honest with you, I was at a time when we were shrinking and we were all working a bit harder because there was less of us to do it. So how can I not say this is a great idea? But I do have concerns, and I do feel, just wish we'd had more meat on the bone and we wouldn't have to come here and see the basic bones, which is Councillor Wheatley and our leaders alluded to. Cost, you talk about costs, they're easy to put down when you've got people, but there are unknown costs. When we used to clear the roads, Mr. Mayor, for clearing the streets, enforcement had to come out. You had to get recovery trucks to take half a dozen cars away. That's going to be worse because people now, because of HMOs, especially in some areas of our ward and others, the people don't park in their street, they park in the 3rd street down because it's the only parking space they've got. So I see associated costs, enforcement being involved. Highways, it's been alluded to, they're going to help, but there's no budget for highways. So who's going to pay for the highways? Who's going to pay for the enforcement? It sounds like I'm being really negative. It's not. I want it to work. If you worked at street cleansing the time I did, the work that we did, more staff is fantastic. I don't want to come back in a year and it's failed. Yeah, we've taken on all these staff. We've let them down. So make it work. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shutt. Councillor Emerson to second.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so I second this amendment. Yeah, what's not to like? Just coming back to some of the key points, Councillor Morland, if you doesn't already realise, alleyways are not the responsibility of the council. Pains me to say it, but it's not the council, it's a well-known fact. There's more litter on the streets than fly tipping in certain parts of the ward. And he also spoke about landlords. And I hope what he was saying about the landlords, I hope he can spout our selective licensing. Alternative, we do nothing. We've got this money, we'll just put it to one side and just like, no, don't want to do it. Just anyway. Coming on to Councillor Shepherd's point about education. Education is the key for all of this, Mr. Mayor. We get a lot of new residents coming into the borough. They don't know our waste system. Some of them don't know where our tip is. And minorities. In my ward of the East Marsh, do have a lot of Eastern European residents, and as we'd say it, in their country, they just go out into the streets, just dump it anywhere, or the part of their culture, they put it somewhere and it just magically comes and gets collected. So we need to educate these minorities as well, Mr. Mayor. Physical and tangible differences. Residents will be able to see the fast results, quick gain, win from this every day where in the area they live. And they can see this for their council tax. The amount of people come to me say, oh, why aren't the council doing it? Where's the council? Why are you doing it as volunteers? Councillor Mickelberg raised a very good point about the tip. It's been the attitude of the council and the press for years, just, oh, take it to the tip, take it to the tip, take it to the tip. Well, if people can't get there, they can't go to the tip. I must criticise the council on some of the things that have come to this, some of the root causes. Removal of council recycling sites, near but all gone within the borough. Monthly recycling collections. I know families that are struggling, even single people and couples that are struggling with this. The weather, Mr. Mayor, lots of rubbish actually flies out of litter bins and council recycling bins from residents, including some of, I know this myself, a lot of the litter I pick up, milk bottles, etc. And this has been fully costed and evidence from the waste and street clean teams, fully costed and funding, using and utilising our current funds, including highways. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Emerson. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to support the amendment, but I do have a couple of questions that has come to mind, and it's around the funding and the transformational funding. Yeah, the funding will support this for a year, but it's transformational funding. So my understanding is it should transform the services on for more than a year. That's putting services in for a year, to me, is not transforming anything. And so I've got questions over the source of the funding on this particular niche. The actual workings of the amendment, I think are fine. I have no problem with that at all. It'll be interesting how we would measure success in this case. You know, how would we know after a year if it has been successful? Will it be, you know, amounts of rubbish collected extra to what we've had in the last few years? How would we measure the success of any educational programs? I mean, that's now impossible, I would have thought, other than we've talked to X amount of people, but you won't know the effects that had. But I'm not disagreeing that we shouldn't do that. I think we should be doing that all the time anyway. It should be part of council services. So it'd be interesting how this develops for me, how it's scrutinised, how it can progress. You know, this is the initial idea, but things change as you start to implement things. Some things will be better, some things you'll drop. Some things you'll say, oh, we won't do it this way. And it'll be interesting to see how this develops in the next year, and whether it informs this council about how we might do things in the future. Forget about the funding side of it, but you know, how we might do it in the future. Will this give this council the opportunity to reflect on this coming year, to look at the budget next year, to try and be a bit more inspirational in the budget next year. So yeah, I'm happy to support this amendment to the budget. And with that, I'll sit down, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wilson, thank you very much. Councillor Augusta.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to support this amendment, but I just want to sort of put a slight request in to officers who are listening, and to, I'm sure, to members of the community scrutiny panel that this will go to, is that we avoid silo working when it comes to this, especially on point 2.4, the community engagement and responsibility. We already have some brilliant community groups out there, such as the Canoe River Cleaner, the North Wall Cleaner, the Pick Walks and the Wombles groups across the authority. And I think if we can bring those on board, make sure we work as a community when this is passed, this is put through, and not just let's just avoid silo working, because that's what I think this council has done in the past. And let's come together as one community to tackle this problem.
Thank you, Councillor Augusta. Leader to reply.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too am happy to support this amendment, and I think there are a few points probably that members have raised that need to be responded to. First of all, with regard to clearance of fly tipping in alleyways, just to correct Councillor Emerson, most alleyways, of course, are not the responsibility of the council because they are privately owned, and I certainly would not be supporting this amendment if it just meant that we were going to be paying for the wholesale clearance of.
On to personal explanation, Mr. Mayor, it was Councillor Morland who indicated about alleyways, not myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Emerson.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Well, I certainly would not be supporting this amendment had it been advocating the wholesale clearance of alleyways at the council's expense when we are not responsible for them. We've got a particular strategy and policy in relation to alleyways, and I think we need to ensure that we comply with that. I can understand why some members of the Labour group are to some extent trying to pour cold water on this scheme, because of course they've not bothered to propose an amendment tonight, but it's not difficult really, is it? You know, this is an amendment tonight that's getting general support from around the chamber, and you know, the Labour group could have done the same, but they didn't bother. So well done to the Liberal Democrats on actually putting in the effort to do it. Councillor Holland commented on the fact that, or implied that we only have 2 barrow teams around the whole of the borough who are responsible for collecting litter and cleaning the streets. Well, of course, that's not the case. We've got all these little vehicles that go out, sweeping vehicles that go out, which also clean the streets. So the barrows, the guys who operate the barrows, very important as they are just a supplementary to those. You know, they don't provide the majority of the street cleaning. With regard to I think Councillor Emerson also mentioned recycling sites, the fact that we don't have the bring to recycling sites across the borough. We still had all these littering problems in these particular parts of the borough, even when we had those in place. So I don't really think they've had any material effect. And as Councillor Morland and other people have said tonight, it is also very important, the education side of this, to make people more responsible, because of course if people weren't dropping this litter and doing this fly tipping in the first place, we wouldn't have the costs associated with clearing it up. And I hope when we instigate the education programme that's detailed in the amendment, that we can also talk to people about being more compliant with the recycling requirements as well, because certainly in the wards that are being highlighted in this amendment, our recycling rates are substantially lower than in other parts of the borough. I admit it's not so easy to recycle in those parts of the borough, but I also think there's an unwillingness amongst some of our residents. They just can't be bothered to recycle, and we need to try and get that message over as to how important recycling is, and to encourage more recycling. That would mean they'll be able to get more ordinary domestic waste in their domestic waste bins. The lids wouldn't be open and there'd be less litter blowing around into the streets anyway, because that's usually when litter starts to blow into the streets. So I don't think there's really anything else I want to say on this, apart from the fact that it is a transformational scheme and it is for 1 year, but if of course it delivers the benefits that are outlined, that will be an ongoing cost saving. And so I think it does comply with the requirements for a transformational scheme. And if we can get it to work this year, it's something we can build on in future years as well. So happy to support this, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. We now move to a recorded vote on the amendment. Over to the monitoring officer.
Or the Chief Executive and former monitoring officer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I respectfully remind members, when you do exercise your vote, to use your microphone. Members are voting on the amendment moved by Councillor Aisthorpe, seconded by Councillor Emerson. Those in favour of the amendment say for, those against say against, those abstaining say abstain. Councillor Aisthorpe.
For.
Councillor Augusta.
For.
Councillor Bassant, Mr. Mayor.
For.
Councillor Bonner.
For.
Councillor Boyd.
For.
Councillor Bright.
For.
Councillor Brooks.
For.
Councillor Cairns.
For.
Councillor Clough.
For.
Councillor Cracknell. Councillor Crofts.
For.
Councillor Dawkins.
For.
Councillor Emerson.
For.
Councillor Farron.
For.
Councillor Freeston.
For.
Councillor Harness.
For.
Councillor Hasthorpe.
For.
Councillor Henderson.
For.
Councillor Holland.
For.
Councillor Hudson.
For.
Councillor Humphrey.
For.
Councillor Jackson.
For.
Councillor Kazmarek.
For.
Councillor Lindley.
For.
Councillor Mickleborough.
For.
Councillor Mill.
For.
Councillor Morland.
For.
Councillor Parkinson.
For.
Councillor Patrick.
For.
Councillor Pettigrew.
For.
Councillor Shepherd.
For.
Councillor Shreve.
For.
Councillor Shutt.
For.
Councillor Sylvester.
For.
Councillor Swinburne K.
For.
Councillor Swinburne S.
For.
Councillor Wheatley.
For.
And Councillor Wilson.
For.
Unanimous, Mr. Mayor. We now move back to the debate on the budget as amended. You had two speakers outstanding. You had Councillor Mickleborough and then Councillor Henderson before any other speakers.
Councillor Mickleborough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've heard about in this budget about the public spaces. Now, I know there's a lot of disquiet around residents about that in front of what's freshly placed shopping development. They say that 3.5 million has supposedly been spent on it, and what do they get? A situation where the slightest bit of wind, there are stones blowing all over, and it's dangerous to walk, especially if people are using buggies or wheelchairs or the like. And they say that that would make it a much better location for a bus station. That's where the bus station used to be. Because if there is going to be a new hub, it's going to be further away from the heart of the town, further away from where Freshney Place is, and it's not going to be so accessible for people who have walking problems. Now, on page 17, it talks about pay pressure because of increase in the national minimum wage. Now, the national minimum wage is to go up in April to £12.21. But I always thought we were a member of the Living Wage Foundation. In that case, the minimum wage is already £12.60. So for the NLC's own employers, it wouldn't be that relevant. If we're talking about people who are on contracts, surely if we're on about, as Councillor Jackson says, we don't want a low wage economy, we want a high wage economy, surely we should insist that all people who are taken on, our contractors and the like, but not directly employed by North East Lincolnshire Council, should also be subject to a proper national living wage of a Living Wage Foundation. And for that reason, I will not support the budget, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mickleborough. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank officers for delivering a balanced budget this year, and that cannot have been an easy thing to do, and I support the budget. But stepping back and thinking about this strategically, this budget's a house of cards. It'll stand up if nobody breathes on it. However, we're in a time of severe financial headwinds, and I fear for our future, Mr. Mayor. I think our finances are in distress because of three things. The first thing is social care, which threatens to eat up 80% of our budget by the end of the decade. Second thing is the escalating costs in providing our most basic services. And the third thing is our projects, which are not delivering revenue, but are consuming costs. So we're the architects of our own downfall of this house of cards, unless we think about the situation strategically. Mr. Mayor, I think there are 5 levers we can pull to alleviate this distress. And I think we need a serious grown-up conversation about that in this chamber and outside. The first lever we can pull is that we can raise taxes. On taxes, we need a conversation with the public about the cost of social care to understand what they're prepared to pay for, with taxes such as the adult social care precept, which may need to increase. We need to have a serious conversation about that. If social care is going to consume 80% of our budget, that's not going to leave much money for anything else. The second lever we can pull is that we can downgrade services. And contrary to some of the things we've heard tonight, the public feels that this is happening now. Who thinks Grimsby is cleaner, safer, has better roads, better parking, better educational facilities than it had in not too distant memory? Officers do their best, but there are fewer of them. And we've heard about littering tonight. Maybe we rely too much on volunteers to keep us going. The third thing we can do is we can be more efficient. And I don't see the sort of cost improvement plans that I'm seeing across government here. I'll give you 3 examples. The first example is that we're investing in children's services and we're seeing an improvement in their quality, which is brilliant. That team is absolutely amazing. But we're not seeing a financial return from that investment. Maybe we never would. Maybe we should just accept there won't be one. But we won't see a return while the number of children looked after in care remains at current levels, which are higher than they should be for an organisation of our size. This is a debate about money tonight. It's the budget debate. We could have a separate and different conversation about the impacts on our children, but we need to think about the cost of social care. And if we're investing in transformation, we need to understand whether that's going to pay any financial benefits back to us in efficiencies. The second one is that we're in housing Equans. They only see cost in that based on the numbers presented to us, largely because our terms and conditions of employment as a council are better than the private sector equivalent. So the public expects at least a 3% saving because that's the profit that Equans deliver to the shareholders that we don't have. Or we expect an equivalent increase in the quality of service and the productivity of staff. That's not in this budget. Thirdly, we can get a grip on our projects and be more prudent about what we invest in. We are notorious, Mr. Mayor, in the eyes of the public for delivering substandard projects late and over budget. We might also need to say no to some projects. I support the amendment that came in tonight, but I feel like we might have too many of them. And maybe we should.
Councillor Henderson.
Thank you very much. So that's my third one, get a grip. The fourth one, we can raise revenues through commercial activity. Mr. Mayor, at the last council, we debated the cost of freshly plates, and it was great to have visibility of the whole scheme. But this view showed that the income from the whole project barely covers the interest repayments, and the council will be back for more money. I can make similar points about the Freeport. When will the tangible fiscal benefit of that start to show on our balance sheet? When is the dividend from green energy going to hit the council's books? At a time when the number of workless houses is up by 1,500, which is probably a better measure of prosperity than the one Leader gave. And the final thing we can do is sell assets, which we're doing. We're selling the ship assets, the land assets, because it didn't give us a return that we wanted. So, Mr. Mayor, I support this budget for now, but at the next council meeting, I'll be asking the portfolio holder for a strategic update on these 5 levers that I've mentioned, because I would like to see the leaders of the council paying the same attention to strategic budgeting that I'm paying. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Freeston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was happy to support the amendment, although I'm not happy to support the budget as it is. So I was keen to see where taxpayers' money was going to be spent for this year. So I went down to the Asylum and Refugee Integration Scheme, which happens in the Learning for Life Centre every Wednesday, tucked away. And in there was young men, mainly my age, being told how they can scam the system, being given free legal advice, even being given free football lessons that British people across the country have to pay for their children, but these asylum seekers and refugees were being given football. Am I in order, Mr. Mayor? Thank you. They was being given free football lessons whilst British people have to pay for them, whilst British children have to go without. Children in our area who can't afford to go to these football lessons. That isn't fair, and it's not right that taxpayers in our area are funding it. So whilst there will be good parts of this budget, I can't with good conscience support a budget that does have that included in it. And I really do hope that council officers and members of the cabinet will take this away and realise that people really don't want to see our money being wasted on schemes like this. And that's just what I could see, because they was aware who I was and that I'd stood for reform, and I had particular beliefs, and I think that they tried to hide, including access to housing, including access to food vouchers and schemes that aren't available to local taxpayers, which is grossly unfair, Mr. Mayor. So I will be opposing this budget on that basis, and I do hope that it will be taken forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Oh, and no, just before, I'd just like to finish that off with, I'm just putting every single councillor and party in this chamber on notice that every single person who voted reform in the last election, our members and our candidates who are going to stand in the forthcoming election, we will be delivering a budget next year that gets rid of all this nonsense, because it is time for change, it is time for reform. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to start with a dissection of the leader's speech, but I have to respond to what's been said about the lessons for people from other cultures, different languages. I know someone who actually teaches in one of these centres that give English lessons to, for want of a better term, migrants, etc., whatever. And they are lessons delivered for the edification of the reform person over the corridor, the other side of the room, for them to be able to speak. It's doctors and social workers. And funnily enough, it's because we haven't invested in our own people for the last 14 years of national government that we're in the position of having to basically pinch doctors and qualified nurses, etc., and social workers from other countries. And they come here for the benefit of our society.
Can you please be quiet? I don't want no interruptions whatsoever. Thank you very much.
They come here for the benefit of our society. So I'd like to dispel the myth that they are getting, that they are scroungers, which seems to have been the point that Councillor Freeth was
Norland, can you please move on now?
Yes, I will do, but that needed to be said and it needed to be made clear. Right, moving on to what the leader said, delivering in spades. Well, wouldn't it be good if we saw spades in the ground? Let's just have a look at what we've been promised. What we've seen is that what we've not got is we've got a rationalisation programme, which is selling off council assets all the time to make ends meet. So much for a great budget. But I must say, I will stop here and say, I think the council officers have done a marvellous job in providing the figures they have and what's required for us to move forward. However, he also talked about iconic buildings. I wish he'd learn a bit of English, because I'm going to give him an etymology lesson. An iconic building is something that existed for a period history. So when we talk about iconic buildings, we're really referring to Dock Tower and other places like Westminster Abbey. You can't have something iconic that doesn't exist. But moving on, to a more serious point is that there is two things that are coming before planning soon. And one is the proposal to knock down the buildings in Osborne Street. But what's not accompanying that planning process is, when is there a costing for that and what they're going to put there? We know there's a bus station alleged, but they haven't put in planning for putting the buildings up. So we're just going to end up with another botched car park, something a la Freeman Street, where you knock down the flats and you leave it empty for years. We've got too many of those around the borough. And the other one is Abbey Road car park. Now there's great plans to destroy that, which is actually an iconic building, and it's recognised by the Architects Society of Britain as such, because it was a local person who has contributed to it. However, again, what we haven't had is how much is the cost for repairing it, and further to that, what's going to happen in terms of what's going to replace it, and how much is that going to cost? We haven't got those costings. So it's very hard to support a budget that doesn't tell you what things are costing as we go. Right. Now, I've mentioned empty spaces. I've mentioned spades in the ground. Pier Gardens, the marketplace, they're both in my ward. I keep getting it in the neck. When is the council going to do it? And I hate to keep saying it because we're all members of this borough. We've all been elected, but I have to point out, it's the Conservative...
1 minute, Councillor Morland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's the Conservative administration that needs to get their act together. I want them to get their act together. I want the members of my community not to be on my back about something I don't control. But on the last point, Mr. Mayor, is that quite simply, I do believe that I can't support this budget because I can't see the plans. All I can see is delivering in spades. Well, let's have the spade in the ground for the people of my ward, which is Croft Baker, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Morland. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I must admit to being quite disappointed with this budget. That's not to say I'm not going to support it, because there's not really any alternative presented. But the reason for my disappointment, one of the priorities of the neighbourhood plan was to build more social housing and more...
Councillor Bonner, are you addressing the Mayor or are you addressing the leader? Because you're looking the other way.
I'm reading
Thank you very much.
from my notes. Sorry, the priority of the neighbourhood plan was to build more substandard houses and more genuinely affordable houses to rent. Other than to build in Alexander Road, there are no plans to support social landlords to provide social housing and affordable housing to let close to the town centre, such as Duchess Street car park, the site of Comber Place and the multi-storey flats. When I was young, I lived close to Duchess Street car park. It was all houses then. My friends used to live on there. They were demolished probably about 50 years ago. Nothing's happened since other than have a sparsely used car park there. One of the problems, good quality housing is the key to replacing the health inequalities between the more deprived and the more affluent areas. Providing better housing, which could have been supported by the brownfield funding, which has actually gone into being shifted into Freshney Place. But we could have made an impression on this and improved the public health of people in deprived areas. So clearly the priorities of this administration are different to mine. But for this reason, as I said earlier, I'm disappointed, and I would like to see something done to improve the standard of many of the houses.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the full council meeting in December, just 2 months ago, the council plan was approved and adopted for 25 to 28, and that accompanying report stated 4 themes: stronger community, stronger communities, stronger economy, greener future, and an effective and enabling council. And then 2 months later, here we are, page 7 of the budget says the council has 2 strategic clear priorities, stronger economy and stronger communities, which made me think, well, okay, fair enough. You're presenting the budget based on the stronger economy and stronger communities, but what's happened to those other 2 themes? Have they been forgotten about, discarded, downgraded? Are they simply not as important? And I'm conscious that since I sort of noted that point to myself, we've had a bit of a discussion today about greener futures and an amendment therein. But what about the effective and enabling council? Is the council plan wrong, or is the budget wrong, or is this just how we do it? Is it not as coordinated as it could be? And have the administration pulled something together that hasn't really coordinated things as well as it could be? Is that a learning point, or is it just an oversight? I'm not sure. I'm surprised it hasn't been mentioned previously, but I just thought I'd bring that forward and see if maybe portfolio holder or the leader might be in a position to explain further. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Humphrey. Councillor Hull.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I broadly support this budget. As Councillor Henderson alluded, when you see the amount that's been taken now in adult social care and children's services, 70% of the service budget this year, that's where it's going. We know the demographics mean that that's going to increase, and that just leaves a small amount, of course, to spend on everything else. But that's what the public sees. And I think sometimes we need to see budget and spend through the public's eyes, because what they see is frontline services. I'm sure all councillors, we all get complaints about frontline services at times. And I think for that amount of budget that we've got left, we have to learn to be more nimble and more flexible, because sometimes this really does come back and it bites us badly. So in my ward a few weeks ago, there was a broken children's swing used by disabled children on a daily basis. And the cost to get it all fixed was £500. There was no money in the budget to do it. So local charities stepped in and they got it fixed for £250. But the perception there is that the council doesn't have the money to do the most basics. So also in my ward, there's a small community group, people in their 80s, some in ailing health. And those people in their 80s, a small group of them, they're desperately trying to raise a few £1,000s and struggling to raise it to make sure that another play park has all weather access for the children to use it. And again, you think in this day and age, we're a wealthy country, should we be in that position when we're setting a budget? I was going to talk about street cleaning, but I think I'd be taken outside and lynched if I did. So I think we've done that one completely to death. But we know the situation there as well. So based on the budget figures, I can't really see the situation improving this year. Inflation, we know, is forecast around about 3.7% for the next year, and growth maybe 1% if we're lucky. And we have rising employment costs with a fairly static economy, and that probably will mean that we won't actually gain any ground at all, and we're going to spend another year pretty much in financial constraint and austerity. And we need to be honest with the public about that. I would just like to talk for a quick minute actually about public health budget, because it often gets bypassed. So it's good to see government this year has just now given an uplift of 5%, although this still provides less in real terms than in 2015, despite a huge increase in demand pressures. I'm very pleased to see that Cabinet accepted a scrutiny recommendation to provide some transformational funding, £300,000 over 2 years in total, and that's going to really help kickstart more preventative and proactive project work in the borough. Recent academic analysis by the University of York shows that public health expenditure by councils is 3 to 4 times as cost effective in improving health outcomes as that delivered by the NHS. It's really important that we look after this. So if we do that, if we improve public health, it's increasingly seen as vital if we want to have a sustainable social care system, which again comes back to that adult social care budget. Improvements here will impact directly on that budget and also our children's services budget, as well as having long-term benefits to the economy in general. If children start school in good time to learn and achieve, that goes through the skills gap narrows. We have people that are better skilled, that attracts employers, wage levels increase and so on. It generally impacts on our economy. So
1 minute, Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I would just like to finish by saying that the finance team is to be congratulated on the hard work that has gone into producing this balanced budget and doing an excellent job with the cards they have been dealt, which don't include many aces.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. Councillor Acethorpe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I stand to support the budget before us with the included amendment for Operation Clean and Green, and thank you, members, for your support on that. While this budget is not perfect, it is the only proposal before us that ensures essential services continue. With no alternative budgets put forward, we have little choice but to work with what is available today. The harsh reality is, Mr. Mayor, councils across the country are being pushed to the brink. Many have been forced to raise council tax to the legal maximum just to stay afloat. Some are even seeking special permission to go beyond it, which the council leader alluded to. At the same time, Mr. Mayor, people are struggling like never before, forced to choose between eating and heating. Yet rather than offering real support, the Labour government has made life even harder. They have refused to scrap the two-child benefit cap, axed winter fuel payments, and failing to tackle the ongoing cost of living crisis, leaving councils and local taxpayers to pick up the pieces. Here in North East Lincolnshire, the only budget before us tonight proposes a council tax rise capped at 1.98%, which is lower than last year. Mr. Mayor, this increase remains a concern and is not something we take lightly, but without fair funding from central government, councils are left with no real choice but to raise council tax just to keep essential services running. Mr. Mayor, we reluctantly support the additional 2% increase for adult social care, but let's be clear, local taxation is not a solution to the social care crisis. Successive governments have failed to fix social care, forcing councils and taxpayers to shoulder the cost. Liberal Democrats have long argued that social care should be funded through a fair national system because care should be based on need, not postcode lotteries or a person's ability to pay. Instead, Mr. Mayor, the Labour government continues to pass the cost onto local communities through councils, worsening an already broken system. And while this year's council tax increase is modest, the reality is that the council's financial plan still left a budget gap. Once again, Mr. Mayor, the council has had to dip into earmark reserves just to balance the books. So while we will not oppose this budget tonight, we do so with caution. Reliance on reserves is not a sustainable way to fund services, and this must be addressed in the future. Mr. Mayor, despite the challenges, this budget does contain some progress, and I am proud that Liberal Democrat campaigns have helped shape key areas. As well as Operation Clean and Green, the Liberal Democrats have long led calls for stronger action on domestic abuse prevention, and I'm pleased to announce that £90,000 from public health reserves have been allocated to pilot a non-convicted perpetrator programme. Mr. Mayor, supporting victims is crucial, but if we are serious about stopping abuse, we must intervene earlier before perpetrators cause further harm. Mr. Mayor, council shouldn't have to step in where the government have failed, but when lives are at risk, we must. This was a key Liberal Democrat campaign, and I am proud we have helped secure this funding. Another Liberal Democrat priority has been mental health and suicide prevention, and I am pleased to see that our efforts have ensured this budget acknowledges its importance. We know councils alone cannot fix the mental health crisis, but with services underfunding and waiting times leaving people without help, we have to do what we can. That's why I'm pleased to announce that the Waiting Well initiative will play a crucial role, ensuring that people on long waiting lists aren't left in limbo, but receive support through wellbeing calls.
1 minute, Councillor Acethorpe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This isn't the long-term solution. Only fair national funding can fix that. But for now, Mr. Mayor, the Liberal Democrats are working to ensure this council steps up where the government continues to fail. So while we will not stand in the way of passing this budget tonight, Mr. Mayor, we do so with caution. And I emphasise that we must all fight for fairer funding, for social care, for public health, and for our communities, because councils and our local taxpayers should not be forced to continue carrying the cost of a broken system. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Aythorpe. Councillor Mill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I say, first of all, it was nice to hear Councillor Jackson congratulate the leader of the Lib Dems on the amendment. Perhaps this is going to be a new era of cross-party cooperation in this chamber. I do hope so. Leading to Councillor Jackson's speech he gave regarding the budget, the capital schemes. He was very positive in his overview of the capital schemes, and I suppose I wouldn't expect him to be anything less. But there's not a lot of positive things to look at, really, when you look into some of the detail. You've got, he touched on the Doughty Road depot, but that's long overrun. You mentioned Sea Road development, but how long has that been before it's been started? You mentioned the Pier Gardens, but of course there's still residents very concerned about the speed at which the slowness at which that speed the scheme is taking to start, but of course the speed at which the maze was ripped up so quickly. You mentioned Freshney Place, but of course there's great concerns about the amount of investment that's tied up in there. And if you look, I can draw members' attention to page 76. There's we've got 950 million committed in the capital schemes committed to fit outs in Freshney Place over the course of the next 3 years. 950 million, that's massive amounts of money. So 950,000, sorry, not enough. But that's still lots of money. That's still lots of money to lots of people around here. It's massive amounts of money. So we're still tied in with Freshney Place. It's a major worry. It really is. And he didn't mention, or I don't think he did, Corporation Road Bridge, which is still ongoing. The saga of Corporation Road Bridge. And I drew members' attention to page 76. Page 77 of the report, there is a picture of Corporation Road Bridge open for those who can't remember what it looks like. So, and referring to Councillor Harness's speech about he gave some very positive vibes about the medium-term financial plan. But I draw members' attention to page 22 and the funding gaps that we have for 2026-27, 4.4 million. And this time it is millions. And the funding gap for 2027-28, 6.4 million. So these are gaps that will have to be closed, by future members of this chamber, some of which may be us, some of which may not be. But that's 10.8 million. They are massive amounts that'll have to be closed. So I cannot support this budget. I'm really concerned about the financial impact future-wise regarding 10.8 million pounds of the gaps. And I think we all should be, as members, really concerned at those sorts of amounts of money. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mill. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I mean, I thought I'd stand up and after listening to some of the comments that have taken place with regards to the developments in Cleethorpes, Councillor Morland mentioned in particular. There's a lot happening in Cleethorpes this year, and you're going to see Pier Gardens, Sea Road development, Marketplace, all starting along with the iconic building, which is the Mermaid Chip Shop, as you perfectly know, near the station, that's currently underway right now, along with the Dolphin, and various other projects that are in the pipeline, station approach. So it's not like we're doing nothing in Cleethorpes. In fact, we're doing the opposite. Things that are happening at Meridian Showground, we've taken it upon ourselves to look at an increase there to bring bigger events to Cleethorpes. which should have been done years ago. The fact that we're bringing Coastwatch to Cleethorpes to make the beach safer in Cleethorpes, along with the new RNLI building that will be completed shortly. It's all positive news for Cleethorpes. There's no extra cost on this budget, which is the important thing. 5G pitches that have gone in this year that have been extensively used, and the results that I have seen from Cleefields have been fantastic. And, you know, and I'm sure there's more to come. Obviously, there's a library consultation second part just about to hit. And I urge all residents to go online and input on that, because it's important how we spend our money, and every pound matters. So, you know, I will support this budget. I think it's the right amount. We have to understand we could go for the full amount, 4.98, but you know, everybody's suffering at the moment, and we've taken that into account. And we could increase services, but it doesn't help people that are struggling to pay the gas and electric bills if we increase the amount of whatever's, you know. And it's so I think we've gone with the right figure, so I'll fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Shreve.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a very short speech, which I'll come to in a moment. I've heard the conversation, grown-up conversations. I think that's an insult. I think it's an insult to the officers. I think it's an insult to the cabinet. I think it's an insult to the scrutiny panels that do sterling work. These conversations are happening all the time. Just because a certain councillor isn't leading them, he doesn't believe they're happening. The same group of councillors for the last few years have been confidently predicting our bankruptcy. And there's no doubt that we do operate in challenging environment, but we are not financially distressed. It's also true that we did receive a higher settlement than we were expecting, but that has not made a difference to this particular budget, the first draft of which, with all the services intact, took into account a lower settlement. So, moving on to my formal speech. All members have had ample opportunity to discuss this budget at 4 all-member scrutiny events. Adult social care was presented at all 4 scrutiny events. How many big conversation questions were asked at these 4 events? None. I will highlight 1 or 2 matters within my own portfolio, especially adult social care, but thought it's worth mentioning that this plan represents the 7th such annual plan submitted by this administration and succeeds 6 full years of balanced performance and projects the 7th consecutive year of balanced performance. Our proposed increase in council tax is one of the lowest in the country. Adult service provision within our sector is one of increasing demand and complexity against a backdrop of financial constraints. Delivering safe and effective adult social care services within this context presents all of us with ongoing challenges and maintaining service quality and sustainable to meet the care market's needs. The adult social care precept has been implied in 25-26 to help create funding to meet these pressures. This has enabled us to help the care market and the community care market to meet expected increased demand and inflationary pressure. The unwelcome increase in employers' national insurance of 15%, which is not being back-funded by government for our providers, and the impact on our providers of national living wage is significant, far more than the 200,000 deficit that we've talked about earlier on. And we have taken the step to ensure they're funded so that our care community has a sustainable future. They also need to think about their own capacity utilisation, but that's a different story. Our mid-term plan proposals still suggest that the longer term demands and demographic pressure cannot be fully funded with the long overdue national initiative to deal with adult social care still awaited. We will undertake our own further work to understand and try to mitigate this risk. Investment in transformation and system change will help to lead a reduction in cost or avoidance in spend. Additional social care grant received for 25-26 will be used to support transformation. We have put appropriate arrangements in place to monitor social care pressures and have committed to taking action to mitigate and manage the impact of increasing demands within the social care system and through the identification of efficiencies. Finally, a couple of words about health. The Labour government has three particular strands, from treatment to prevention, from hospital to community, and from analogue to digital. We're supporting all three of those in much greater ways than some of our members seem to believe. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shreve. I'm looking round the room, unless Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to support this budget. Now, we've been asked to talk a little bit about our portfolios, and so that's what I'm going to do. I wasn't one of the councillors that signed up to the climate emergency. Now, I did that because I thought it would attract a lot of extra costs, and I didn't want to force that on the local taxpayers. But I couldn't have been more wrong, Mr. Mayor, because after an investment of £50,000 on staffing costs, we've gone on to receive over £5 million in grants to decarbonise our estates and plant trees. On top of that, the net zero target that we set has encouraged officers to pursue efficiency savings at a rate that probably wouldn't have happened if we hadn't set that target. And the property rationalisation scheme, which we've heard about tonight, it's encouraged us to identify and dispose of excess property, saving the cost of running that property and releasing the capital to hopefully offset some debt. On the environment, the fleet replacement deal has been agreed, and we've chosen electric vehicles wherever possible. You'll all know the very popular brown bin charge has gone up by the standard 2.5% and no more. That's the equivalent of a pound, that's all. That's still less than £2 to get your brown bin emptied 28 times a year. I mean, when you compare that to the cost of a skip, that's really good value for the taxpayer. We've spoken about the depot rationalisation. That's underway, should hopefully be completed soon. And that, again, will save us money in the long run. We've had a successful bid for £250,000 to deliver the June project. That will complement the Cleethorpes Habitat Management Plan. So that's all looking pretty rosy in environmental net zero. There were, as you've seen in the papers, there's one major concern, which is the potential of the energy to waste plant coming under the emissions trading scheme in 2028. Now, I've long tried to argue that we recycle all our waste, because I think putting it in that plant and turning it into electricity and hot water energy is recycling. We take all the scrap out and the ash goes off to make breeze blocks. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And that was when I first saw that plant all those years ago, when I first became a councillor, I couldn't understand why every authority wasn't doing it. I thought it was marvellous. But we're not allowed to call that recycling, because even though it stops 99.9% of our waste going to landfill. In fact, the only bit we take to landfill is the filters on the chimney that take all the nasties out. It does, of course, emit CO2. Now, there's always been exemptions, but in 2028, that exemption stops, and we are going to have to find £20 a tonne of carbon that is going to be emitted. That could saddle us with a potential bill based on last year's figures of 790,000. So that's an issue for the future, but we're aware of it. And as somebody said, it might not be us here in the chamber that has to deal with it. So I'm confident with everything we're doing, but that's the one big worry on the horizon that we need to keep an eye on. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hudson. Councillor Lindley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I was going to comment basically on what Councillor Shreve touched on around the consultation around this budget, and particularly the process consultation with members and that process. So I won't go over that again. But basically, just to pick up on a couple of points that have been made tonight, Councillor Morland said that he couldn't support this because he's not seeing any spades in the ground. Well, I think Councillor Morland doesn't need any reminding, I'm sure, that Rome wasn't built in a day. And I think clearly we have all our ducks in a row ready. And I think you are going to see significant development and things will start moving. But I think to say that we've not made any spades in the ground signifies that we haven't done any work. And I think, you know, there's been plenty going on in the background, and once things do happen, that's going to have a positive impact on this area in terms of bringing revenue into the borough. So just wanted to try and reassure Councillor Morland, because I think he's under some illusion that it's not going to happen. Councillor Henderson, I think one of the main points, and I think the big issue here is around social care, both children's and adult social care. Councillor Henderson touched on children's services, and we know that that's a big spend. That's a big spend area. We know that, and we've even more so. We've had to invest heavily, and that investment now is we're reaping the benefits of that, because we've now got in place. We've got an absolutely outstanding team who are delivering, and certainly got our children's services on a very positive trajectory. But you know, that's come at a price, and I think to deliver those sort of improvements in children's services and still being able to deliver a budget despite these significant pressures, not just in children's services but also in adult social care, I think it's something to celebrate, really, and that's why we should be supporting this budget. So I will be supporting the budget. And finally, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to say that I cannot associate myself with Councillor Freeston's comments earlier, which quite frankly I thought they were appalling. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lindley. Councillor Stuart Swinburne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I rise obviously to support this budget, but let's not forget one thing, Mr. Mayor, that this council has to comply with its legal obligations by setting a balanced budget. A balanced budget that has been approved by the Section 151 officer. That's to start with, Mr. Mayor, but the recommendation for a 1.98% increase plus the 2% adult social care precept, as been mentioned earlier, is one of the lowest increases in the country. Just a couple of highlights, Mr. Mayor, that it's not like other Labour controlled places, such as Bradford, 15% increase. Labour controlled, again, Birmingham with 10% control. Labour controlled Slough, 8%. Labour controlled North Somerset, 15%. Labour controlled Newham, East London, 10%. All of these, Mr. Mayor, have been approved by a dysfunctional, out of touch Labour government. Mr. Mayor, this budget is one of support for the communities of North East Lincolnshire. This administration recognises the cost of living difficulties that residents are having due to broken promises from the Labour government. And with a low-level increase in council tax and no cuts in frontline services, this administration is showing that we do care. Mr. Mayor, we have listened to what has been said at the budget workshop sessions. They were open to all members. And we have listened to such as a recommendation from the independent group for an extra £150,000 per year over 2 years. It's a pity that Councillor Wheatley mentioned there about how she's not in favour of the things happening here. It's a pity she didn't attend those meetings, so she could have made some sort of comment or a recommendation to Cabinet. Mr. Mayor, with regards to my portfolio responsibilities, housing, it is our intention to support the growth of the borough through sustainable infrastructure by delivering housing that meets residents' needs and aspirations. Delivering such schemes as the 120 homes that's starting this year on Alexander Dock waterfront, and also tackling homelessness. That's a concern of ours at the moment, Mr. Mayor. Another one that's of a concern at the moment is the temporary accommodation. This continues to be a challenge, and this has not reduced over the last 12 months and is something that we continue to try and address. Mr. Mayor, going on to what Councillor Henderson mentioned, he mentioned about car parking. Mr. Mayor, we are in the process of a car park review across the whole borough. Another item that's been mentioned tonight, Mr. Mayor, on a couple of occasions, is Corporation Road Bridge. And that is nearing completion, and this council has been kept well informed about the complex issues that have led to the delays. Again, at the previous scrutiny meeting on Tuesday night, Councillor Wheatley was in attendance there, never asked one question at all on Corporation Road Bridge. If she was so concerned, why didn't she make name to him? Mr. Mayor, the LTP is a 3-year programme. LTP, Local Transport Plan, is a 3-year programme. And the 2024-2025 programme is in progress with 38 schemes and an expected successful expenditure of 99.7%. Mr. Mayor, going on to transport, and I think we all recognise that the BSIP scheme continues to be a success with the council delivering on bus service improvement measures across the borough. By introducing the pre-9:30 a.m. concessionary fare scheme has proven to be a great success, and with the opening of the CDC next month, this will increase usage and footfall into Freshley Place. The government have recognised, Mr. Mayor, how we are using the funding successfully.
1 minute, Councillor Swinburne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The funding successfully and have just announced an additional £1.6 million in revenue funding for BSIP projects within North East Lincolnshire, and plus £2 million in capital investment for BSIP during 25-26. This will be a big advantage towards our aspirations for the transport hub. Mr. Mayor, these are exciting times for this borough, and this budget demonstrates our commitment to providing a place that people will be proud to live, work and visit. Mr. Mayor, I support this budget as presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swinburne. Councillor Patrick.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Mayor. I thank the officers for their hard work in putting this budget together. Although this budget has plenty of fiscal competence, this budget lacks imagination and political leadership. Why? Because, Mr. Mayor, and I'll have to correct my leader on this, this is not a Conservative budget, it's an officer budget. It's blatant because although it has plenty of numbers and narratives, it lacks communities and it lacks people. And I would have to say, be bold to say that this budget can perhaps be described as adequate. Now, there are two key things that worry about this budget for me from the leader. Firstly, this budget year from the Conservative administration, something was fundamentally missing from his speech. The typical political apparatchik thanks for the funding from the government that we've received. And received this year they have, Mr. Mayor, funding that allows them to maintain services, funding to deliver on their capital projects, such as they are. And the leader's blue on blue Tory government with a Tory council has finally come to an end, and about time too. But Mr. Mayor, what else is missing? Well, I'll take you back a bit to what's changed for me. In the 2020 budget, the Conservatives were confident, driven, proud and ambitious, plenty to talk about what was happening and what will happen. Well, Mr. Mayor, where has it all gone? Why is it missing in this budget? Well, Mr. Mayor, I feel I should apologise to the Conservatives as a member of the last administration for failing to leave them more than a few years worth of projects in the cupboard for them to call their own. And for the first time and last time, hopefully, in my political career, I'm going to paraphrase Margaret Thatcher. The problem with being a Conservative administration is that you soon run out of your previous administration's initiatives and ideas. And I'm sure the Conservative group are waiting for me to dust off one of their old manifestos from their days in opposition about how they have U-turned and backpedalled on every meaningful pledge they ever made. But frankly, Mr. Mayor, you can only do that in so many budgets before it comes passé. Residents don't deserve an adequate budget, Mr. Mayor. They deserve at least a good budget, if not an outstanding one. The heart of where this budget falls down is in the values. The Conservatives are out of touch. This has been shown no more than in the leader's opening statements. The leader touched on average incomes, seemingly just a nice point to note. But if one takes a step back, it's almost offensive. The notion that residents on lower incomes should be cheerful that others who are earning more to make a local statistic look better on a national scale. The Tory non-solution to all ills is invest money and create some employment. Now, Mr. Mayor, I welcome both of those things, but the social and economic challenges are deep and complex. Residents that for years have struggled to afford rent, pay bills, access the services they need and depend upon that they could some 15 years ago. Average incomes are nice, Mr. Mayor, but let's look more closely at those on common incomes and lower incomes. And we've even heard tonight, Mr. Mayor, from the Liberal Democrats talking of the government failing to tackle poverty and inequality. Well, Mr. Mayor, when I first started in this chamber, the Liberal Democrat members of Parliament had sold their souls for rides in the back of ministerial cars and to help enable a wave of biblical social plagues on this land. Bedroom tax, defunding police, defunding the NHS, defunding social services, taking benefits from the most vulnerable, creating more damn misery. The Liberal Democrats, Mr. Mayor, never forgive, never forget. Now, we know this is all going to pass tonight, Mr. Mayor, because we had that shameless piece of theatre over the Liberal Democrat amendment, which I fully supported. But what I couldn't help was feel a bit strange, and I'll go back to 4 years ago, is that this Labour administration—
1 minute, Councillor Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This Labour administration actually moved similar amendments in their budget, calling for cleaner streets, calling for greener parks, calling for easier ways for residents to get rid of their bulky waste. All costed to the penny, and the Conservatives couldn't vote it down fast enough. Why? Well, when I asked the 151 officer, Mayor, what was the actual cost of this scheme, she mentioned the £200,000, but she neglected to mention the 3 Liberal Democrat votes in this chamber on demand for the administration. I might have been fooled tonight, Mr. Mayor, if it wasn't for Councillor Lindley, and my advice to Councillor Lindley is, if you want to be seen supporting an amendment off the cuff that you know nothing about, it's probably not a good idea to read a pre-prepared statement on how wonderful it is. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Patrick. Councillor Crofts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I've got concerns. Obviously, another Labour accountant can't tell the difference between millions and thousands, and they're giving advice to this administration. Very good. Councillor Patrick, really nice that you thanked all the officers. They have done an excellent job. Thank you for coming up with no ideas how to improve the budget. I think the medium-term financial plan is well balanced, actually. Borrowing, as been indicated, is known and it knows it's bad, but it is under control. If you look at that, I think Councillor Holland mentioned that. A lot of worst case numbers have been actually included by the officers, and actually they shall drive to improvements on that. And I'm sure they'll be obtaining them. So at the minute, we've got a very conservative, small c for you guys, a very conservative budget number. So we should be doing better than that. We're all aware of the challenges of adult care and social children's social care. The pressures are better understood and have good mitigation programs to help control the spend. We've been in them meetings where they've told us what's happening and what they're going to do to improve. They are improving, and you've got to give them some credit. It is going up. We know it's going up, and we as an administration will have to deal with that and find ways of managing it. The reserves and the capital investment programme are robust estimates. Everybody knows that. We've sat in scrutiny and we've gone through them at this moment in time. We have put things in place, Mr. Mayor, that we will be checking on these big projects, these capital projects. This is a great step forward, and thank you very much for bringing that forward. Mr. Mayor, although no increase would have been loved by the residents, we all understand costs have increased this year, and not just because of the Labour government. Some of my fellow councillors asked why we would not be increasing it to the maximum 5%. I'd love to see this on social media tomorrow, that you wanted to increase the council tax more than what the administration have put forward. It'd be nice to see that you actually stand up and put that out there on social media instead of slating everybody else. The 3.9% fulfils council requirements and is a sensible increase, Mr. Mayor, and I support the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crofts. Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did have a nice prepared speech, but I'll deal with that in a moment. Mr. Mayor, I want to thank the Liberal Democrat Party for putting this amendment forward to this budget and looking at things sensibly. I, for one, am open to more discussion, and I would say to my independent colleagues that if they want to come and discuss things with us, that we should encourage them to come and do that. What I do find difficult is the same old rhetoric from my colleagues in the Labour group. Same stuff every year. If I remember one year, their idea of an amendment was a dog poo warden, if I recall. Nothing new, no amendment tonight, nothing on the table, just critical. Well, Mr. Mayor, this is a little bit different. East Marsh Ward councillors have put this forward. This is an idea from the East Marsh. Our reform friend over there, one visit to Freeman Street, he thinks he knows everything. That just about sums up reform, doesn't it? Yeah, out of touch, Mr. Mayor, totally. Now, the final thing, Mr. Mayor, what I want to talk about is my portfolio. And I will tell you one thing for safer and stronger communities: more enforcement. That's it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shepherd. Councillor Wilson.
Put me by surprise there, Mr. Mayor. Obviously I'm going to rise to oppose the budget. I think that's pretty obvious. I'm quite positive and pleased that there's no service cuts. It's good to see. So why am I opposing it? Well, I've got a few concerns really, and those concerns make it that I can't really support this budget. And if you look at the budget document and it talks about robustness of estimates, it just gives a summary of the services. It doesn't really give why the estimates the services are using are robust. And we know from history, last few years, 12 weeks in, we're usually in a massive deficit, aren't we? You know, and so the robust I would have expected after talking about this over the years, that the administration would have taken what I've been saying about that and try to give a better undertaking in the budget papers that those the robustness of estimates would be there to see. But no, they've not bothered. I'm also concerned about the reserves. I mentioned it at scrutiny, the scrutiny that we all went to, and I think it's the first time, and I will be stand to be corrected, that the 151 officer has said we might dip into general reserves because there's not enough money. There might not be enough money in the pot, and that's a big concern. I quite enjoyed our independence, Councillor Henderson's speech and his 5 levers, but he missed a lever off, and that's like expanding council tax base, i.e. more housing. So I don't know why I missed that one off. And talking of housing, I wanted to look at what we were doing about people in the vulnerable sector and housing. And all that's in the budget is there's a housing review. Don't tell us anything. We've had a year to prepare this budget. We could have had the review way before the budget, but no, just says there's a housing review, no detail. And then when you start reading the rest of the budget, there's actually not much detail in it at all. It's just general mishmash of corporate speak. It don't actually say much at all. But I've been in this game long enough to understand it. Another concern I've got, which I have raised time and time again, every time we do a budget, we do a double whammy on people who pay for adult social care. We give them the council tax and we increase the fees that they have to pay. And I am aware that there are people that don't pay fees, but the ones that do end up paying twice. And we've heard tonight from the Conservative group, oh, people can't afford it, that's why we're keeping council tax down. What happens if you're disabled and need a load of care? You're not really bothered about them. You'll put it up twice. Just don't wash with me, I'm afraid. Don't wash at all. And projects. Say no more. I'm not even going to talk about projects because it's obvious that, you know, where that's going. But I will talk a little bit about Corpo Bridge. There was no questions from me at scrutiny. Just like Councillor Wheatley. Why? What's the point? What's the point? It's that bad
1 minute,
that we
Councillor
just got to
Wilson.
accept that we've got to get it done. Thank you. Regarding public health, and I'm finishing this off, I'm really interested in public health. I've been talking quite a while now about the budgets in public health. I think we need an in-depth look at where the money's going and what the outcomes are for that money. I've been saying it for a year now, and I'm hoping that we can actually start to do that. So with these concerns, Mr. Mayor, that I've just expressed, I don't think I can support the budget at all. And if I can't support the budget, Mr. Mayor, I'm not going to put an amendment in because that would be supporting the budget. I wish they'd get a grip. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. We've had quite a number of members speaking on the actual motion and on the amendment. Is there any further speakers before I bring in Councillor Jackson? Councillor Jackson to reply.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I've heard it all now. An excuse for not proposing an amendment is because they don't support the overall budget. And I don't ever remember them using that excuse on the occasions when we were in opposition. They didn't, when we didn't propose an amendment. There was always uproar from the Labour group on that occasion. And we've got a situation again tonight, of course, where the principal opposition group on this council has not proposed an amendment to our budget. You know, I don't really think I need to say any more about that, and I'm sure the public will make their own minds up over that. There's a lot of points to respond to, so I apologise. I'm not going to be able to I've only got 5 minutes, so I can't get through all of them. I'll just focus on a couple of things that Councillor Wilson said first. He made quite a number of challenges around the what he considers the poor standard of the budget papers. All I can say, Mr. Mayor, was I was at both of the budget scrutiny meetings and he didn't challenge the standard of the budget papers, either of those meetings. So that would have been the opportunity to do that. But there were hardly any challenges from Labour at the budget scrutiny meetings. And yet they stand up tonight and try and express concerns.
Mr. Mayor, I must have a point of personal explanation. The scrutiny meeting that I attended, I was the main instigator of questions at that scrutiny meeting, and it's an unfair blight on my character to say that that isn't true.
Councillor Wilson. Councillor Jackson.
Well, that may be the case, but there were no questions about the standard of the budget papers from Councillor Wilson. Right, moving on to some of the other speakers. Councillor Mill, with his £950 million to spend on Freshly Place. You can tell he's an NHS accountant, can't you? Because that's the sort of figure they have for their annual overspend in just in one regional area. So that's obviously where he's got that from. He did ask about the £950,000 fit out for Freshly Place in the capital programme at budget scrutiny. I will grant him that one. And he was given a response there. We know that's money that's only just been put in the capital budget in case we need it for as and when tenants may change within Freshly Place. There's no guarantee we're going to need it, but because we're a prudent administration, we do include money in there in case we should need that at some point in the future. And we would, of course, get that back from the payments from tenants within Freshly Place when they took on the new units. The capital schemes that Councillor Mill expressed concerns about, like Freshly Place, for example, that was a very detailed report on that particular project in December, as he well knows, and the estimates are very prudent for that. We've potentially overestimated the cost of expenditure and underestimated the income that we're going to get from it. So we have been very prudent on that. I don't think there are any particular concerns there. Moving on to Councillor Patrick, who I thought probably, definitely gave a far better speech tonight than the official leader of the opposition. But again, all I will say to you, Councillor Patrick, is you don't like the budget. You've got nothing in it seems to please you. But again, where are your amendments? I didn't see any here tonight. You asked about schemes not happening. There's a huge amount of stuff happening now. We started the work in Freshly Place. We know that work is about to start in Cleethorpes. We have to have that money spent by April of next year. So all that work is going to be happening in the next 12 months. And with regards to how we bring about improvements for people in deprived areas in the borough, one thing that we're trying to do as a Conservative administration is attract new jobs and investment to the area. You don't improve the area by holding back certain parts of the area. We've got to move forward and make progress and create the job opportunities for those people. That's the way we're going to get the people out of poverty and improve things for people across the whole of the borough. And that's certainly what our budget.
1 minute, Councillor Jackson.
Our plans are doing. I think probably, Mr. Mayor, those are probably the main points I wanted to mention. Just one really for Councillor Henderson and Councillor Holland. I think I'm right in saying Councillor Henderson wasn't in his council chamber 2 years ago when we proposed having a 4% council tax increase then rather than the 5% one. But I do remember Councillor Holland at that particular time predicting that the council would go bankrupt and would be issuing a 141 notice, and we would also have mass redundancies. That was 2 years ago. We haven't done either of those things yet, Mr. Mayor, and we're not going to do it again this year. This is a sound budget that we're proposing. It's an ambitious budget. There's a huge amount happening in the borough, and I look forward to members supporting the budget tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, if I may, just regarding redundancies. Over the last 2 full financial years, this council has spent £1.8 million on compulsory redundancies and exit passages.
Thank you, Leader. In accordance with the Constitution, I will now take a recorded vote on the budget recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members are voting on the budget as amended. Those in favour say for, those against say against, those abstaining say abstain. Councillor Aisthorpe.
For.
Councillor Augusta.
Against.
Councillor Besant.
For.
Councillor Bonner.
For.
Councillor Boyd.
For.
Just a reminder to members to use their microphones. Councillor Bright.
For.
Councillor Brooks.
For.
Councillor Cairns.
For.
Councillor Clough.
Against.
Councillor Cracknell.
For.
Councillor Crofts.
For.
Councillor Dawkins.
For.
Councillor Emerson.
For.
Councillor Farron.
Against.
Councillor Freeston.
Against.
Councillor Harness.
For.
Councillor Hasthorpe.
For.
Councillor Henderson.
For.
Councillor Holland.
For.
Councillor Hudson.
For.
Councillor Humphrey.
Against.
Councillor Jackson.
For.
Councillor Kazmarek.
Against.
Councillor Lindley.
For.
Councillor Mickleborough.
Against.
Councillor Mill.
Against.
Councillor Moreland.
Against.
Councillor Parkinson.
For.
Councillor Patrick.
Against.
Councillor Pettigrew.
For.
Councillor Shepherd.
For.
Councillor Shreve.
For.
Councillor Shutt.
Against.
Councillor Sylvester.
For.
Councillor Swinburne K.
For.
Councillor Swinburne S.
For.
Councillor Wheatley.
Against.
And Councillor Wilson.
Against.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, elected members. The result of the recorded vote, for 25, against 13. The motion is carried.
Mr. Mayor, conscious of the time and conscious there remains of the business on the agenda and conscious that you're reminded to call for a short recess for members to have a comfort break, do you move the suspension of standing orders to take the meeting beyond 9:30, if necessary, beyond 10 o'clock, if necessary, forgive me. Do so move.
I will move that.
Do you have a seconder?
Second, Mr. Mayor.
And put that to the vote, Mr. Mayor.
All those in favour? Clearly carried. I would now like to move a brief adjournment of the meeting to permit the officers to circulate the council tax resolution and have a comfort break. Please be seated, members. Agenda item 5, Council Tax 2025-2026. The Council Tax resolution resulting from the setting of the budget has been circulated. This is not an opportunity to repeat the debate on the budget. Councillor Jackson, will you move the resolution?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, as you say, Mr. Mayor, this council tax resolution that's in front of us is a direct result of the budget which we just agreed 10 minutes or so ago, and I'm happy to move it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Harness, will you second?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to second the resolution as laid out. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Members? No? So we'll put it to a vote.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'm not going to be voting to increase the council tax this year, and whilst I understand the absolute pressing need to have a balanced budget, I think really someone in this chamber needs to actually stand up for really what residents are actually feeling out there. And as much as tonight we've heard a lot of, well, we'll call it sort of bragging from the Conservative group about what's happening in other local authorities up and down the country who are struggling financially and taking special measures, some of which, by the way, are Conservative and Liberal Democrats administrations, such as Windsor and Somerset, two good examples right there. But this amount of council tax we're increasing by is going to make a meaningful difference in the lives of certainly vulnerable people, and not just vulnerable people, but for those who are just about managing. It might be the difference of actually having a holiday with the family this year or not having a holiday for the family, an extra treat at the supermarket, which for many of us would just seem normal in family life. They might not actually be able to afford this year. And for others, it's just another problem in actually even being able to afford day-to-day bills. And as much as the Conservatives might be actually quite proud of the fact that this council tax increase is only going to be a small amount of pain compared with what other residents are going to feel in other authorities, all I would say to the leader, if he wasn't so out of touch, he would know there's no beauty in this pain.
Thank you, Councillor Patrick. Is there any further speakers on the matter? Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to speak, but after that nonsense from Councillor Patrick, he must remember there's the council hardship fund. Anybody that's really struggling can apply to that, and of course it rolls over every year. We never use it all, so that's there. I much preferred it when Councillor Patrick sat there sulking quietly after being booted off as leader, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Hudson, any further speakers before bringing the leader to reply?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, nobody wants to see taxes increase. As a Conservative, I'd like to see taxes generally much lower, not just for local authorities, but across the country. All I will say, Mr. Mayor, is that if Councillor Patrick was so concerned about the level of council tax, he and his group could have moved amendments to the budget, which could potentially have resulted in a lower council tax, but he didn't bother, so I suspect he doesn't really care. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. In accordance with the Constitution, I will now take a recorded vote on the recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members are voting on the council tax resolution that has been circulated. Those in favour of the resolution will say for, those against will say against, those abstaining will say abstain. Councillor Aisthorpe.
For.
Councillor Augusta.
Against.
Councillor Besant.
For.
Councillor Bonner.
For.
Councillor Boyd.
For.
Councillor Bright.
For.
Councillor Brooks.
For.
Councillor Cairns.
For.
Councillor Clough.
Against.
Councillor Cracknell. Councillor Crofts.
For.
Councillor Dawkins.
For.
Councillor Emerson.
For.
Councillor Farron.
Against.
Councillor Freeston.
Against.
Councillor Harness.
For.
Councillor Hasthorpe.
For.
Councillor Henderson.
4.
Councillor Holland.
4.
Councillor Hudson.
4.
Councillor Humphrey.
Against.
Councillor Jackson.
4.
Councillor Kazmarek.
Against.
Councillor Lindley.
4.
Councillor Mickleborough.
Against.
Councillor Mill.
Against.
Councillor Morland.
Against.
Councillor Parkinson.
4.
Councillor Patrick.
Against.
Councillor Pettigrew.
4.
Councillor Shepherd.
4.
Councillor Shreve.
4.
Councillor Shutt.
Against.
Councillor Sylvester. Councillor Swinburne K. 4. Councillor Swinburne S.
4.
Councillor Wheatley.
Against.
And Councillor Wilson.
Against.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Elected members, the result of the recorded vote, for 25, against 13. The motion is carried.
Agenda item 6, Treasury Management Policy and Strategy Statement 2025-26. This is a report of the portfolio for finance, resources and assets considered by Cabinet on the 12th of February 2025, where the recommendations were agreed as set out in the report. Councillor Harness, will you move the recommendations?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to move the recommendations as laid out.
Thank you, Councillor Harness. Councillor Harness.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm reprieved. Yeah, Treasury Management Policy and Strategy Statement 2025-26 or TMSS. Treasury management covers two main areas, borrowing and investment. There is a very dry description, which I will read out. CIPFA has defined Treasury management as the management of the organisation's borrowing, investment and cash flows, money market and capital market transactions, the effective control of those activities and the pursuit of optimum performance consistent with those risks. The TMS was developed in consultation with our Treasury management advisors who are Link Treasury Services Limited. The report was considered by the Audit and Governance Committee on the 30th of January with one recommendation to Cabinet. So let me first respond to the Audit and Governance Committee. The Council's borrowing will be affordable, sustainable and prudent, and consideration will be given to the management of interest rate risk and refinancing risk. The source and type of borrowing should allow the Council transparency over its debt. The Council's borrowing strategy and need to borrow to service the capital programme and maturing loans has been reported in many financial reports in full transparency. The Council only borrows to fund capital expenditure after the application of grants, contributions and capital receipts. The level of external debt has historically been substantially less than the underlying borrowing requirement. In fact, this is a very much under-borrowed position. This is because the council uses its internal resources to minimise the need to borrow externally. Where external borrowing is required, a balance is struck between taking advantage of lower interest rates for short-term borrowing and the certainty that comes with long-term fixed-rate loans. The council continually monitors prevailing economic conditions against its borrowing requirements. At present, a continued focus on short-term borrowing represents the best balance between cost minimisation and risk management. The TMSS sets limits on the level of overall external debt, this being an operational boundary. This sets an indication of the expected maximum debt at any given time and an authorised limit, which is the absolute legal cap on our total debt set according to statute. There are checks and balances to ensure borrowing is affordable, sustainable and prudent. The ratio of financing cost to net revenue stream with a 10% ceiling is one such example. Annex 2 details the annual minimum revenue position statement and policy. This sets out the statute arrangements ensuring that debt can be repaid when it falls due. The budget for debt interest paid in 2025-26 is £8.3 million based on an average debt portfolio of £189 million at an interest rate of 4.4%. The council's primary objective in relation to investment remains the security of capital, the liquidity or accessibility of the council's investments, followed by the yield earned on investments remain important, but are of secondary considerations. The budget for interest income in 25-26 is £0.325 million. Obviously, this is very much dependent on interest rates and the bank rate. Investments as of 31st of December 24 were £27.9 million, and borrowing at that point was £168.6 million. Thank you, Leader. I will move the recommendations as laid out.
Thank you, Councillor Harness. Do I have a second?
Can I rise to do a point of order? Mr. Mayor, the portfolio has moved a motion as recommendations as laid out. But I can't see any recommendations as laid out in the papers.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. No to remarks. The recommendations was this is an escalation from Cabinet. Cabinet was to consider the report and refer its contents to full council, merely for noting.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think that explanation is valid in this occasion. There is a recommendation to council that's laid out. This is not a recommendation to council. This is a cabinet recommendation. It's been proposed that it's a council recommendation. There is no recommendation. Therefore, this needs to go away and come back with a recommendation.
Monitoring Officer.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. But as I say, the only remit to full council tonight is to note the contents of the report. I accept it could have been made clearer. I accept that, but it's just to note the report.
Mr. Mayor, I accept what the monitoring officer is saying, that this is to note. So there should have been a recommendation to note, but there isn't. There is no recommendation. And unless there's a recommendation as laid out, it hasn't been proposed verbally. Unless there's a recommendation as laid out, then we cannot proceed with these formal proceedings.
Monitoring Officer.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. This report comes from Cabinet. It's referred up to full council to note. It would have been nice if the recommendations were more express. They're not. But all full council needs to do is note the recommendations. They've been laid out by Councillor Harness and stand to be seconded. The recommendations are on page 188 of the pack.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer. We'll now move on. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will move the recommendations as second the recommendations as set out on page 188 of the pack. Reserve the right to speak.
Do I have any speakers on this matter? Councillor Patrick.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Mayor. Can I just say that Councillor Hudson seems to be enjoying himself tonight. I'm sure later he'll be celebrating this meeting with a shot of Roundup quietly in his home. Mr. Mayor, I'm rising to oppose the, I'm not sure what I'm opposing actually at this stage, but whatever it is, I'm opposing it. Because obviously I've highlighted many occasions that I'm deeply worried about the level of eye-watering borrowing that's happening within this authority. And I won't necessarily be able to go into the details, it's all laid out within there. But in particular because although we have the prudential indicators and we absolutely do those to the Audit and Governance Committee, which I and my colleagues thoroughly enjoy, it is worth noting that those borrowing limits are limits that we endorse ourselves, we support ourselves as a local authority, effectively marking our own homework. But I would have to say that when I was portfolio for finance, those borrowing limits were significantly lower, and I can't help but feel that those borrowing limits now sit at a level which I would frankly find to be undesirable and worryingly not necessarily even safe. We're servicing debts now at the highest proportion that we've done in living memory, and whereas it was an indicative figure, are we spending more than 10% of our revenue actually servicing debts? At the top of my head, I think when we actually left administration, it was about 6 something percent, 6 point something. It's now the high 9 point something, and it's forecast to get dangerously close to that and might even actually spill over. But of course, as we know, with borrowing, this is the nature of well, local authorities and all forms of public sector bodies, even the NHS from time to time, to see that unexpected borrowing has to happen. Say, for example, if you were to actually buy a shopping centre and you found out there was a lot more challenges with it than you actually previously thought, and you might have to start borrowing within the millions. Further to that, Mr. Mayor, I would actually like to thank the Conservative group tonight because a bit of a new mindset they've given me is that I had no worries in July of last year as to what impact a Labour government would actually have on the finances of this council. But now I think I actually have, because with the finances looking a bit more robust, a little bit safer, I think it's given the Conservative group a bit more bravado and ambition around our borrowing to actually take more risks. And I do worry for the future of this authority if their reach actually starts to outspand their grasp. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Patrick. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm advised to move an amendment for procedural reasons. An amendment is to note this report, as that's not recommended in the paper at all. So I'll amend the recommendations to note this report. Thank you.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second, Mr. Mayor.
On the amendment, any speakers? Councillor Patrick.
Great, this, isn't it? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I certainly do want to support this amendment because I do feel very strongly, like my colleague Councillor Wilson, that there is a real lack of clarity within the report as to actually what we're debating tonight and what we're actually going to be resolving. And I do think this is perhaps a learning experience for the officers within all this, and perhaps even indeed the portfolio holder might take some lessons in this about how he proposes things in this chamber. But for the sake of good bookkeeping and good governance, I strongly support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any further speakers on the amendment? Councillor Harness to reply.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do apologise. I fell into the trap of reading what was in red and white before me, which was a recommendation. I do apologise about that. So I would support the amendment.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harness. Is it a recorded vote? No, is it? Thank you. Now move to a substantive motion. Councillor Henderson, I believe, indicated.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick points. I mean, this is a
highly technical document by its nature, and it's intended to be, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think stepping back from some of the detail that's in it, it talks about some tests for prudence of our borrowing position, and it talks about assumptions around lower interest rates and inflation returning to target. And I think anybody stepping back and looking at those assumptions would really doubt them at the moment, where interest rates took an unexpected jump. Inflation took an unexpected jump in the last few days. So I think if we're giving feedback on the document, what I would like to see is some sensitivity analysis that says, okay, these are the tests we're going to apply, but this is how they apply at the moment, so we get some understanding. I think that the most notable bit of it for me is on page 10, which is page 204 of your bundle, where there's a chart that shows the local context. And we've already heard about the operational boundary, which you'll see we get dangerously close to. So our borrowing at the moment is 168, forecast to rise to 241 in the next 3 years, which takes us very dangerously close to the green line that you'll see in your bundle. So when we hear that we are under borrowed as a council, I don't think that's a narrative that will play very well with the public, actually. I think that the situation that we're in, where we're borrowing money ahead of getting any return on that money that we're borrowing, so it's going into a sink. One of the sinks is freshly placed quite clearly. I think that we should reference that in this document. So I'm not quite sure what I'm voting on, if I'm voting on anything at all, but those have been my reflections on the document as it's presented.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Mill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No figures, just words. Okay, so first of all, I think we've all got great respect. All of us in this chamber have got great respect for the finance team led by the Section 151 officer. And what I like to do when I look at these reports, I like to look at the section that the overview, the Section 151 officer's overview that she's put in on page 198, which I just draw a couple of concerns to. The fourth paragraph, the Section 151 officer's overview, she states that there's significant forward borrowing requirement necessary to cover both the capital programme and maturing debt. Further down in that paragraph, 151 officer has put that filling this requirement is further complicated by financial market lenders choosing not to consider us. That's a concern. Now, the reason for them not to consider us is that our auditor's value for money qualification remains in our statement of accounts. So if I've understood that right, some market lenders aren't lending us money and won't lend us money because of that. But we've got a significant forward borrowing requirement. So that to me is a concern that we just all need to be aware of. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mill. Councillor Holland.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just like to make a couple of very quick points. You know, when we talk about saying that we're under borrowed, of course, that's against our own criteria. And I think sometimes that gives us a false sense of security. Yes, we can just keep borrowing more and more. And of course, that's not the case. And we see the CFR rising quickly over the next couple of years. And the other point I'd like to make is in terms, we often talk about grants and funding. As if this is money that just appears from somewhere. But of course, that is just other taxpayers' money. Well, our own taxes as well. And when we look at public sector debt in the country, net public sector debt at the moment about 3 trillion. But I was just looking the other day. The Taxpayers Alliance say now, if you take into account public finance initiatives, pension liabilities, decommissioning nuclear power stations, and so on, the actual public debt for this country is something like 12 trillion, sorry, 12 followed by 12 zeros. And that is increasing and increasing. And the government is going to have to rein in spending, no question. So all the grants and funding that we've relied on for capital projects, I think we're going to see that tap turned off. So we're going to have to be very careful as we move ahead in terms of borrowing. And what I would say is, looking at that capital spend, we're going to be absolutely need to be on the ball all those projects, exemplary project management, and very, very detailed business cases that we can actually hold people to account for, because it is going to get tougher.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. Councillor Cas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Reading through this report, now that we actually know that we're only going to be voting to accept it instead of whatever we were going to be doing before the amendment, I wanted to point out item 6, children and young people implications. As an authority-wide corporate function, the immediate impacts of the day-to-day Treasury operations on children and young people are the same as for the council as a whole. However, certain Treasury decisions, most notably those relating to long-term borrowing transactions, will place a greater burden on young residents over time, relevant to other demographics. We're borrowing now and making the future generations pay for the mistakes of this administration, and that is completely unacceptable, Mr. Mayor. In 30 years' time, I will still be paying for the mistakes made today. In 50 years' time, I will probably still be paying for the mistakes made today. How many in this room can say in 50 years' time you'll still be paying for the mistakes? Only a handful, Mr. Mayor. Only a handful of us in 50 years' time will be paying for the mistakes being made by this administration. That is awful. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. There are a few points that I want to respond to. First of all, you know, the capital programme is are not mistakes. They are projects that we are implementing, like the Freshley Place redevelopment, to improve North East Lincolnshire, which young people will benefit from for many years ahead. So they will be reaping the benefits as well as contributing to the repayment costs. And while we're talking about Freshley Place, which Councillor Henderson talked about, alleged that it was a sink, he saw all the financial calculations that were undertaken when we considered it in December, a full council meeting. It's very clear that the income we're getting from Freshley Place will be more than covering the cost of the borrowing and the maintenance of the building. He's shaking his head, but the figures are there. And, you know, I know he doesn't accept it, of course, because he didn't put the figures together. Therefore, if he didn't do it, it can't possibly be valid. But, you know, the figures were put together by the finance team. It was all there laid out, and it will, you know, it will be more than covering its costs. So, you know, I think when it's a bit like when you borrow some money to buy your house, isn't it? With these projects, you know, you have a mortgage. Nobody seems to object to having a mortgage for the house because it's a long-term investment that you're going to benefit from over a number of years. And it's the same with the capital programme. And of course, I will remind members that no capital project, even if it's in the capital programme, is a draft programme. No project goes ahead unless it's gone through a proper business planning process, and if the situation changes and we reassess the situation, that particular project will be dropped from the capital programme, and we have had examples of that over the years. So just because it's in the capital programme doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go ahead. There will be a business case required immediately prior to it being finally approved by Cabinet or by the council as appropriate, wherever it's coming to. And the final point I just want to make is about the ratio of financing costs to net revenue stream, which is on page 226 of the pack, which of course is the amount of money, the percentage of council tax that council taxpayer is contributing towards the repayment of debt. Now, Councillor Patrick alleged that is now approaching 10%. Well, this year, 24-25, it's 7.23%. So it's around the same sort of figure as it was when Labour was in power. And although it's projected to go to 9.86% in 27-28, you have to remember that these are worst case figures. That assumes that all the capital projects go ahead. That assumes that we don't get any grant funding towards any of them. And historically, Councillor Patrick will know as a past finance portfolio holder, historically, these figures always drop as time goes by because, as I say, projects drop out the system or we get other funding towards the cost of them. So this is a worst case scenario, which of course has to be put forward to the council by the Treasury Management team. But I think, you know, councillors have to bear in mind, we are looking at a worst case scenario here. And in reality, there's never been a time when I've been on the council that these sort of figures have ever actually materialised. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. I'm looking round the room. I'll call Councillor Harness to reply.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Jackson has summed the situation up very well. I mean, obviously, I look upon borrowing in a slightly different way to a lot of other people, in so much as I support the borrowing for the regeneration for the capital programme. I think Councillor Kasmarak spoke about people paying the debt in years to come. Well, I look upon the borrowing as that we're building a place where people want to invest. And I think recently we've seen two examples of that. We've seen the carbon fibre factory announced at Greycoats, which will be 400 jobs. And we've seen the green energy hub, energy terminal at Immingham Docks that's come here. These people are only going to come here if they see an area, an authority that is well advanced in its regeneration, that it's a place that they can see, that they can come and invest in, good housing stock, good schools and good transport. So on that basis, you know, I will support borrowing. Perhaps as a portfolio holder, I shouldn't say things like that, but I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harness. I will now put the recommendations to a vote. All those in favour as the recommendations which was amended by Councillor Wilson. All those in favour. Anyone against? Agenda item 7, urgent business. There is no urgent business. I now declare this meeting closed. Thank you for your attendance.